Did you know that in the 1960s, many TV dinners were packed by hand, and that some workers could fill over 1,000 trays in a single day? Yeah, there were no AI-powered robots at the time, just workers with clever packaging skills to ensure those frozen trays get into your mom's fridge on time. But how exactly were TV dinners assembled so efficiently in the 60s? Stick around to find out. Step 1. Preparing the ingredients. Now, before anything got packed into those shiny little trays, someone had to actually cook all the food. And you might be surprised to hear this, but in the 1960s, most of the ingredients in TV dinners started off totally fresh. Yep, that mashed potato didn't come from a powder. That was a real potato, peeled by hand or through old-school machines, boiled in massive pots, then whipped up in industrial mixers that could probably fit inside your living room. The result? Creamy mashed potatoes that tasted just like homemade, if not a little better, especially when they were drowning in gravy. Vegetables were no less important. Peas, carrots, green beans, and even corn were gotten fresh from farms, especially in the summer, when harvesting was at its peak. Workers dumped them onto long metal conveyor belts, where they got rinsed and sorted. Then came the blanching process. This meant quickly boiling or steaming the veggies just enough to soften them and lock in their bright colors and nutrients. The trick here was not to cook them all the way, just enough so they wouldn't turn to mush later when you reheated the meal in your oven. As for the meat, that was serious business. Turkey and beef were two of the most popular proteins in TV dinners, especially Swanson's classic turkey dinner, which was basically a legend. Meat was delivered in large cuts, then trimmed by hand, and there were no fancy robots at the time. Workers used knives and raw muscle power to shape everything into manageable pieces. Then they seasoned it with good old salt, pepper, and sometimes a bit of butter or gravy mix. The meat was cooked in giant ovens or even boiled depending on the recipe. Once cooked, it was sliced or diced down into those perfect little servings that would later sit right in the center of the tray. Every single part of the meal was cooked separately, which sounds simple, but back then, that was actually a huge deal. Each component had its own station, its own workers, and its own process. Why? Because the goal was to keep everything tasting exactly the same every time. And honestly, for 1960s factory food, that's kind of impressive. Step 2. Assembling the meals. Once all the food was cooked, cooled, and ready to go, it was time to put the meals together. This was where things really started to look like the classic TV dinners we all know. Picture a long factory room filled with the sound of conveyor belts whirring and workers moving fast but smooth, tray after tray sliding down the line like clockwork. The trays, made of shiny aluminum, were lined up on a conveyor belt that never stopped moving. Workers stood on each side and had one job only: fill their section with the right food. One person scooped mashed potatoes, the next handled the peas, another placed the turkey slices, and someone else made sure the gravy landed right on top. Everyone had to move fast because the belt didn't wait. But get this, many of those workers could fill 1,000 trays in a single day. The rhythm was so precise, it was like watching a choreographed dance with mashed potatoes instead of jazz hands. And portion control, that was taken very seriously. Each scoop had to be the same size, every time. Why? Because too much food meant wasted money, and too little meant unhappy customers. Some factories used basic mechanical portioners, kinda like oversized ice cream scoops that dropped the same amount of food every time. Others just relied on skilled hands and sharp eyes. Either way, you better believe the final result had to be just right. In 1960, Swanson switched things up by adding a fourth section to their trays. This section was created for dessert, and it was a total game changer. Suddenly, your frozen dinner came with a little square of brownie or apple cobbler. And yes, these were baked ahead of time too, then cooled and cut into neat squares that fit perfectly in their little compartments. It was like getting a surprise treat at the end of your meal, and people loved it. By the time the tray reached the end of the line, it looked like a mini feast. Meat, veggies, potatoes, and something sweet all packed nearly into their own little spaces, ready for freezing. It may not sound high-tech today, but in the 60s, this was the future of dinner. Step 3. Freezing the meals. Alright, so by this point in the 1960s factory, you've got your trays filled with turkey, mashed potatoes, peas, and maybe even a brownie in the corner. Now comes the part that made the TV dinner actually a TV dinner: freezing it solid. And they didn't just toss these trays into a cold room and hope for the best. Nope, they had a much cooler trick up their sleeves. Literally. Once the trays were fully loaded and moving down the line, they were sent straight into something called a freezing tunnel. This was a metal hallway filled with sub-zero air blasting from all directions. And here's the part that sounds straight out of a sci-fi movie. Factories in the 1960s started using something called cryogenic freezing. That means they sprayed the food with liquid nitrogen, which is so cold it can freeze stuff almost instantly. We're talking minus 320 degrees Fahrenheit kind of cold. Now, why go to the extreme? Well, regular freezing takes time, and that creates big ice crystals, which ruin the texture of food. No one wants mushy peas or soggy mashed potatoes, right? Quick freezing, on the other hand, locked in the flavor and texture like magic. So when someone later popped the tray in the oven, it still tasted like something close to a home-cooked meal. This process also kept the meals safe to eat for months. Bacteria didn't stand a chance against those freezing temperatures. Plus, everything stayed in place. The gravy didn't leak into the dessert, and the corn didn't crawl into the mashed potatoes. Everything was frozen exactly how it was placed. And believe it or not, this wasn't fully automated yet. There were still workers checking trays, making sure none of them got stuck, and watching over the process like hawks. If a tray didn't freeze properly, it was pulled off the line. That way customers at home didn't end up with half-frozen, half-soggy dinners. So yeah, this part of the process might have been chilly, but it was the key to making those meals last, ship well, and taste decent after a long nap in the freezer. Pretty clever for the 1960s. Step 4. Packaging and distribution. Now that the meals were frozen solid, it was time to dress them up and get them out the door. And let's be honest, this next step is where the 1960s magic really came to life. They didn't just throw those aluminum trays in a plain box and call it a day. Oh no, they went all out. Once the trays came out of the freezing tunnel, they were sealed with a sheet of foil. Not just any foil either. This was a specially designed lid that helped keep air out and flavors in. Workers would press the foil tightly onto the tray, sometimes by hand, sometimes with machines, depending on the factory. This kept everything inside neat and tidy, so the food wouldn't slide around or get freezer burn. Next came the outer packaging. In the early 60s, Swanson and other brands started boxing their meals in cardboard packages that literally looked like television sets. Some even had fake dials and screens printed right on the front. Why? Because people were obsessed with TV, and eating dinner in front of the tube was the new family tradition. These packages stood out like crazy on grocery store shelves because it wasn't just dinner, it was an experience. Each box was labeled with the meal's name, a picture of the food, and instructions that basically said, pop it in the oven for 25 minutes, and boom, dinner's ready. Keep in mind that microwaves weren't a thing in most homes yet, so this was all built for your old-school oven. After boxing, the meals got stacked into massive cold storage rooms inside the factory. These rooms were basically giant walk-in freezers that kept everything frozen while waiting for the next ride. Then came the refrigerated trucks, but these weren't your average delivery vans. These trucks were specifically built to keep the temperature low during long trips, so nothing melted on the way to stores. From there, the meals were sent to supermarkets across the country, ready to be snatched up by busy moms, working dads, and anyone else who wanted dinner without doing dishes. And just like that, frozen meals went from a factory belt to America's dinner tables. Easy, fast, and totally 60s. Step 5. Marketing the convenience. Now this is where things got really clever. Swanson didn't just make TV dinners. They made them cool. Back in the 1960s, families were obsessed with television. It was the center of the living room, the after-dinner hangout, and even the babysitter on some nights. So Swanson thought, why not tie dinner to the TV itself? And just like that, the TV dinner was born. Not just as a product, but as a lifestyle. And no, they didn't just slap food in a tray and hope for the best. Swanson went all in on marketing. As I mentioned before, they literally designed the dinner box to look like a television set. We're talking knobs, fake screens, and everything. It was pure marketing gold. Those boxes practically jumped off the shelves. When Mom saw them in the grocery store, it felt like buying into the future. And the commercials were something else. Picture a smiling mom pulling a shiny aluminum tray from the oven, setting it down in front of Dad and the kids, who were all sitting on the couch, watching a black and white Western. No dishes, no complaining, just peace, quiet, and mashed potatoes. Swanson made it look like a dream. But here's something you may not know. Before the TV dinner name caught on, they were originally just called frozen dinners. Not very exciting, right? But Swanson's team realized they needed something catchy, something that screamed convenience. And since everyone was glued to their TVs anyway, they nailed it with TV dinner. And boom! A cultural phenomenon was born. The name stuck and people loved it. What's wild is that this wasn't just about food. It was about tapping into the American dream. Post-war families were all about modern living, new appliances, faster meals, and more time to relax. And that's exactly what the TV dinner promised. A modern meal for a modern family. Swanson even timed the release of new meals around popular TV shows. Yep, they knew what people were watching and when they were watching. So while you were tuning into The Ed Sullivan Show, your Salisbury steak was heating up in the oven. Simply put, Swanson didn't just sell frozen food. They sold a whole vibe, because the assembly of TV dinners in the 1960s was a testament to the era's innovation in food production and marketing. I mean, eating dinner had never been this cool. So give Swanson a huge like for revolutionizing dinners in America. And if you'd like to learn about how other iconic brands were made back in the day, subscribe to the channel and we'll see you in the next one.